Chapter 34. The sea stretched endlessly beyond the craggy cliffs, a vast sheet of dark sapphire flickering beneath the fading twilight. At the edge of the world, where England's rugged coast met the merciless waves, the old lighthouse stood, a sentinel against the encroaching night. Its beam carved a steady arc across the restless waters, slicing through the mist like the unblinking eye of a silent guardian. But on this particular evening, something was amiss. A sudden commotion shattered the tranquil isolation of the lighthouse grounds. A shout, startling, desperate, rang out against the howl of the wind. Then silence. Moments later, a lone figure sprinted across the jagged rocks towards the keeper's cottage. His face drained of color, he stumbled at the doorway, his breath ragged, his fingers trembling as he banged against the heavy wooden door. It was Dr. Edward Linwood, a reserved but respected physician who had come to the lighthouse at the behest of its owner, Mr. Ambrose Latimer. Now his carefully maintained composure was nowhere to be found. His gaze flickered toward the towering structure, where the beacon's glow shone as it always did. And yet something was terribly wrong. Inside the cottage, a fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows along the stone walls. Seated in an armchair, a glass of fine brandy resting on the table beside him, was a man of impeccable appearance. His tailored grey suit was pressed to perfection, the cuffs of his pristine white shirt peeking out at the precise length. Mustache, waxed to the finest degree, twitched slightly as he raised his glass and took a measured sip. Hercule Poirot had been here for 2 days, at the request of Ambrose Latimer, who had written to him with a cryptic plea for help. The letter had been brief, but urgent. Monsieur Poirot, I fear that something is terribly wrong at Fairhaven Lighthouse. Strange happenings, voices in the wind, and the feeling that I am being watched. I may be losing my mind, but if I am not, then I am in grave danger. Please, I implore you, come at once. I trust no one. A curious invitation indeed, and Poirot, ever intrigued by the unusual, had arrived to find a collection of peculiar individuals staying at the lighthouse estate, guests, staff, and, of course, the troubled Mr. Latimer himself. Now, as the desperate knocks echoed through the room, Poirot turned his head slightly, raising a delicate brow. Hastings, who had been reclining opposite him with a newspaper, sprang up and hurried to the door. Dr. Linwood nearly fell inside. "It's Latimer," he gasped. "He's vanished." Hastings frowned. "Vanished? What do you mean?" The doctor ran a shaking hand through his damp hair. "One moment he was there, standing by the railing of the lighthouse tower. I turned my back for a second, and when I looked again, he was gone. Simply gone." Hastings exchanged a glance with Poirot, who set his brandy down with great precision. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, rising from his chair. "This is most irregular, is it not?" Hastings, ever the practical one, grabbed his coat. "He must have fallen." Dr. Linwood shook his head vehemently. "No, I looked down. There's no body on the rocks, no sign of him in the water." His voice lowered. "It's as if he vanished into thin air." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Come, mes amis, we must investigate." The wind howled around them as they hurried toward the lighthouse. The beam of light swept overhead, illuminating the jagged rocks below. The tide crashed against the base of the cliff, but there was no body, No trace of Ambrose Latimer at all. Poirot examined the ground carefully, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. The lighthouse balcony's railing was sturdy, showing no signs of damage. There were no footprints leading away, no sign of a struggle. He turned to Dr. Linwood. "Tell me, mon cher docteur, what exactly did you see?" Linwood swallowed. He was standing right there, near the edge, looking out to sea. He was anxious, as he has been for days. "I stepped inside the lantern room for just a moment to check on the keeper, and when I came back, he was gone." Poirot hummed thoughtfully, stepping forward to examine the railing himself. "And who else was near the lighthouse at this time?" "Only myself, Mr. Gerald Ashford, Latimer's business partner, and the lighthouse keeper, Mr. Tobias Wren." Hastings frowned. "And you're sure he didn't simply slip and fall?" Linwood nodded. "Absolutely. There was no sound, no cry, no splash. It was as if the sea swallowed him without a trace." Poirot straightened. "A man does not simply disappear, mon ami. Either he has fallen, he has fled, or—" His gaze flickered towards the lighthouse. "He has been made to disappear." Gust of wind sent a chill through Hastings' spine. "You think he was murdered?" Poirot adjusted his cuffs. "I think, Hastings, that we have a most fascinating puzzle before us." And with that, the little Belgian detective turned toward the towering lighthouse, its beams sweeping across the restless sea, a beacon calling out for justice. Chapter 2. The lighthouse loomed above them, its beam cutting through the misty night like an unblinking eye. Hercule Poirot, standing with his hands clasped behind his back, gazed up at the structure with quiet contemplation. The waves crashed below, a steady rhythmic sound, while the wind carried the salty scent of the sea through the air. Hastings, still shaken by the eerie disappearance of Ambrose Latimer, turned to Poirot. "You don't honestly believe he just vanished into thin air, do you?" Poirot gave him a measured glance. "No, mon ami. People do not simply vanish. They may deceive, they may be deceived, but they do not cease to exist between one moment and the next." Dr. Linwood, still breathless from his run to the cottage, gestured toward the lighthouse balcony. I tell you, I saw him standing there not even a minute before he disappeared. There was no scream, no struggle, nothing." Poirot tapped his chin thoughtfully, then turned his sharp gaze toward the lighthouse keeper, Mr. Tobias Wren, who had arrived moments ago. Wren was a weathered man in his 60s, with a thick grey beard and sharp blue eyes that gleamed like the sea. His oil-stained coat bore the marks of years spent tending the lighthouse. "You, monsieur," Poirot said smoothly. "You were inside the lantern room, yes?" "Aye," Wren confirmed. His voice was rough, like the crashing waves. "I was polishing the lenses when the doctor here burst in. I ran out with him, but Mr. Latimer was gone." Poirot nodded. "And before that, did you hear or see anything unusual?" Wren scratched his beard. "Nothing much, sir. Mr. Latimer had been pacing up and down all evening, kept muttering to himself. He seemed nervous, like a man expecting something, or someone." Poirot's eyes glinted. "Expecting someone? Now that is interesting." Dr. Linwood hesitated. "I don't know if I'd say that. He's been anxious for days, ever since he first sent for you, Poirot." "Indeed." Poirot ran a gloved hand along the wooden railing, his fingers brushing over the damp surface. And yet, this is not the behavior of a man who fears nothing, a man who paces, who mutters, who requests the presence of Hercule Poirot. He is a man who expects something dire. Hastings folded his arms. Then where is he now? Poirot ignored the question. Instead, he stepped closer to the lighthouse door. Come, mes amis, let us inspect the scene with precision, yes? Inside the lighthouse, the lantern room at the top of the lighthouse was warm, the great rotating lens throwing refracted light across the polished brass fittings. Shadows danced across the walls, shifting with the slow turn of the light. Poirot moved with careful steps, his gaze sweeping over the floor, the railing, the heavy metal door leading inside. Hastings, meanwhile, tried to shake off the unsettling feeling that pressed down upon them. There was something eerie about being up here, so high above the sea, standing where a man had supposedly disappeared without a trace. Poirot knelt beside the door and ran a finger along the threshold. He examined the screws on the hinges, then straightened and dusted his hands delicately. Curious. Hastings frowned. What is? Poirot gave a small smile. Tell me, mon cher Hastings, when a man falls, does he not leave behind some sign of his struggle? Well, yes, I suppose so. And yet here we have none. No scuff marks, no broken railing, no cries for help. Does that not strike you as odd? Hastings shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps he was taken by surprise? Perhaps. Poirot's voice was mild, but his eyes shone with interest. Dr. Linwood stepped forward. But Poirot, I swear to you, he was standing right here. He pointed to the space near the railing. If someone grabbed him, I would have seen it. If he had climbed over the railing, I would have heard something. Poirot sighed. Yes, doctor, you have said this. And yet our problem remains. Wren scratched his head. Well, if you ask me, there's something cursed about this place. Hastings rolled his eyes. Oh, come now, don't tell me you believe in ghosts. I'm not saying ghosts, Wren muttered, shifting his weight uneasily. But there've been strange things happening lately. Lights seen on the cliffs at night, voices carried by the wind. He lowered his voice. And folks say that once someone disappears near the lighthouse, they're never found again. Poirot smiled thinly. Ah, superstition. How often it masks a more earthly mischief. Still, he turned his gaze back to the railing, his mind working through the facts. A man does not simply disappear. But if he had neither fallen nor climbed over the railing, where had he gone? Poirot turned to Wren. Tell me, monsieur, this lighthouse, has it any other exits besides the main door? Wren hesitated. Aye, there's a service hatch at the bottom, but it's kept bolted shut. No one uses it. Would you be so kind as to show it to me? With a wary nod, Wren led them down the winding spiral staircase. Their footsteps echoed against the stone walls. At the base of the lighthouse, Wren pointed to a rusted metal hatch, bolted shut with an iron latch. Poirot examined it closely. He pressed his palm against the metal, then tugged at the bolt. It did not move. Locked, Wren said. Has been for years. Curious, Poirot murmured. And yet, I wonder. He stepped back, tilting his head as he considered the possibilities. Then he turned to the others. We must not assume too much, mes amis. Let us return to the house. I must have a word with Monsieur Ashford. Hastings raised an eyebrow. Latimer's business partner. Why him? Poirot smiled mysteriously. Because, Hastings, when a man vanishes, one must always consider those who stand to benefit. With that, Poirot turned on his heel and stepped out into the cold night, the wind stirring the edges of his coat. Behind them, the lighthouse stood as it always had, tall, silent, and unyielding, and yet, within its stone walls, a secret lay waiting to be uncovered. Chapter 3. The wind had grown colder by the time Poirot, Hastings, and Dr. Linwood arrived at Ashford Manor. The grand house sat on a cliff's edge, its dark silhouette framed against the restless sea. A single light glowed from the drawing-room window, casting long shadows across the gravel driveway. Poirot rapped the brass knocker firmly. After a brief wait, the heavy oak door creaked open, revealing a tall man in his late 50s, his expression one of poorly concealed irritation. His sharp features and well-groomed silver hair gave him an air of authority, but there was something about his rigid posture that suggested tension. You must be Hercule Poirot, the man said, his voice clipped and formal. I am Reginald Ashford. Poirot inclined his head. Indeed, monsieur. I regret to call upon you at such an hour, but it concerns your business partner, Ambrose Latimer. Ashford's expression did not change, but Hastings, ever observant of human nature, noticed the slight tightening of his jaw. What about him? Poirot stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, smoothing his coat as he entered. Monsieur, he has disappeared. Ashford closed the door with deliberate slowness. Disappeared? Dr. Linwood spoke up. Vanished from the lighthouse not an hour ago. He was there one moment, gone the next. Ashford's lips pressed into a thin line. I see. Poirot observed him keenly. No exclamation of shock, no frantic questions, only a measured response, as though the news was not entirely unexpected. Poirot clasped his hands together. Monsieur Ashford, when did you last see Latimer? Ashford moved toward the fireplace, his fingers idly adjusting the ornate clock on the mantelpiece. Earlier this evening he was troubled. How so? A sigh. He was behaving strangely, pacing the room, muttering under his breath. He kept insisting that he was being watched. Hastings frowned. Did he say by whom? Ashford shook his head. No, but he was in a state of nervous agitation. He drank more than usual, which is unlike him. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Did he speak of why he summoned me? Ashford hesitated, then turned to face Poirot fully. He mentioned you, yes. Said you were the only one who could see through it all. But when I pressed him, he refused to explain. He was paranoid, Poirot, frightened of something, but unwilling to say what. Poirot studied Ashford closely. The man's words were carefully chosen, revealing only what was necessary. Poirot knew that such precision often concealed deeper truths. Tell me, Monsieur Ashford, Poirot continued, in your business dealings, was there any recent discord between you and Latimer? A flicker of something passed through Ashford's eyes. No more than usual, he said too quickly. We had disagreements, of course. What partners do not? But nothing of great consequence. Poirot smiled slightly. And yet Monsieur Latimer's fear suggests otherwise. A man does not summon Hercule Poirot for mere trifles. Ashford stiffened. If you're implying I had anything to do with his disappearance, Poirot, I assure you, you're mistaken. Poirot spread his hands. Ah, non, monsieur. I accuse no one. Not yet. I merely seek to understand. A tense silence filled the room. Then, from somewhere within the house, there came a muffled thud. Ashford's head snapped toward the hallway. Poirot's sharp gaze followed. Hastings instinctively reached for the door handle. What was that? Ashford hesitated. Nothing. The house is old. It makes noises. Poirot stepped forward. Nevertheless, mon ami, in my experience, unexplained noises are often most explainable if one cares to investigate. Without waiting for permission, Poirot moved swiftly toward the hallway. Ashford made a move to stop him, but Poirot merely lifted a hand in polite dismissal. Hastings followed close behind, while Dr. Linwood remained awkwardly by the fireplace, glancing at Ashford. Poirot moved with precision, his polished shoes silent on the thick carpet. The hallway was dimly lit, the shadows deepening at the far end, where a staircase led downward. Poirot paused, tilting his head as if listening. Then, from below, another sound, this time a soft scraping, like wood against stone. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, now that is most interesting. Ashford appeared at his side. Poirot, I must insist. Poirot silenced him with a small gesture. Then, without a word, he descended the stairs. The basement smelled of damp stone and aged wood. A single lantern flickered, casting a feeble light. Poirot's gaze swept the room, noting the barrels, the shelves stacked with forgotten relics of Ashford Manor's past. But it was the far wall that caught his attention. Something was off. Poirot moved closer, running his gloved fingers along the wooden panels. Then he smiled. A false wall, he murmured. Hastings blinked. A what? Poirot gestured toward a slight gap where the panel met the stone. Observe, mon ami. The wood is newer than the rest, and here, scratches near the floor, as if something heavy has been moved. Hastings swallowed. Are you suggesting? Poirot did not answer. Instead, he pressed against the panel with his palm. At first, nothing happened. Then, with a reluctant groan, the wood shifted. A hidden door swung open, revealing darkness beyond. A passage. Ashford paled. I had no idea. Poirot's voice was gentle, but firm. Non, monsieur, that I do not believe. Without hesitation, Poirot stepped through. Hastings hesitated, only a moment before following. The passage was narrow, the air thick with the scent of earth and salt. The tunnel sloped downward, curving slightly. Poirot's eyes gleamed in the dim light. A most intriguing development. Hastings swallowed. Poirot, where do you think this leads? Poirot did not answer at once. He walked with purpose, his mind racing. A hidden passage leading from Ashford Manor. But to where? Then, suddenly, he halted. A few feet ahead, the passageway opened into a small chamber. In the center, bound to a chair, was Ambrose Latimer, unconscious. Hastings gasped. Good heavens! Poirot moved quickly, kneeling beside the man. A bruise darkened Latimer's temple, and his wrists were tied tightly. Poirot checked his pulse, then nodded. Alive but injured, but injured. Hastings exhaled in relief. Who could have done this? Poirot straightened. Ah, that is the question, mon ami. His gaze shifted toward Ashford, who stood frozen in the passage entrance, his face unreadable. Poirot's voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath it. Tell me, Monsieur Ashford, who else knows of this passage? The silence stretched. Then, at last, Ashford spoke. No one, but Poirot saw the lie in his eyes, and he smiled, because now he knew. Chapter 4a. Heavy silence filled the underground chamber, as Poirot's sharp eyes remained fixed on Reginald Ashford. The dim lantern light cast deep shadows across his face, highlighting the tension in his rigid features. Hastings, still breathless from the shock of finding Ambrose Latimer bound and unconscious, glanced nervously between the two men. Poirot took a slow step forward. Monsieur Ashford, you say no one else knows of this passage? Ashford hesitated only a fraction of a second before nodding. That's correct. Poirot sighed, shaking his head. You see, monsieur, there is a small problem with that statement. He gestured toward the unconscious Ambrose Latimer. If no one else knew, how did he come to be here? Hastings felt a shiver crawl up his spine. The walls of the passage seemed to press inward, the air heavy with salt and secrecy. Ashford's fingers twitched at his sides. I don't know. Poirot tilted his head. A most unsatisfactory answer, mon ami. Dr. Linwood finally found his voice. Shouldn't we wake him? He might be able to tell us who did this. Poirot turned his gaze to Latimer and nodded. Yes, Hastings, if you please. Hastings hurried forward, kneeling beside the bound man. With careful hands, he loosened the ropes around Latimer's wrists, then gave him a firm shake. Latimer, can you hear me? A low groan escaped the injured man's lips. His eyelids fluttered before he let out a sharp intake of breath. Where am I? Poirot crouched beside him. You are safe now, monsieur. But I must ask, who did this to you? Latimer blinked rapidly, his gaze darting around the dimly lit chamber. When his eyes landed on Ashford, his entire body tensed. His lips parted as if to speak. Then suddenly, his expression twisted in panic. I don't remember. Poirot's moustache twitched. Ah! Hastings frowned. What do you mean you don't remember? Surely you must have seen something. Latimer shook his head violently. I was at the lighthouse. I was waiting for Poirot. Then everything went black. I must have been struck on the head. He raised a trembling hand to the dark bruise on his temple. Poirot studied him for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. And yet, monsieur, if you had truly been unconscious all this time, I wonder... Latimer's breath hitched. Wonder what? Poirot straightened, dusting off his coat. I wonder why your shoes are scuffed with dirt from this very tunnel, as if you walked here yourself. A stunned silence filled the chamber. Latimer's eyes widened, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Ashford, too, looked momentarily taken aback, before regaining his composure. Hastings sputtered. Poirot, are you suggesting that Latimer brought himself here? Poirot steepled his fingers. I suggest nothing yet, my friend. I merely observe. His eyes flicked to Latimer. But tell me, monsieur, does it not strike you as curious? A man is attacked, kidnapped, and yet his own shoes betrayed signs that he was walking willingly. Latimer swallowed hard, his fingers clutching at the arms of the chair. I don't know how that could be." Poirot's voice was softer now, almost coaxing. "Come, monsieur, it is clear to me that you are frightened, but fear will not change the truth. What happened at the lighthouse?" Latimer's gaze darted toward Ashford for the briefest second before he clamped his mouth shut. Poirot did not miss it. Hastings turned toward Ashford, his brow furrowing. "Ashford, if you knew about this passage, you must have known something was going on." Ashford's lips pressed into a thin line. "You're making baseless accusations." Poirot merely smiled. "Ah, but I do not accuse, not yet." He took a step closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "But I do wonder, monsieur, why did Latimer look at you before deciding to say nothing?" Ashford's eyes darkened. "You're imagining things, Poirot." Poirot's fingers lightly tapped his chin. "Non, mon ami. I imagine nothing. I see, I observe." His voice dropped even lower, a note of steel beneath the calmness. "What I see is a man who knows more than he claims." The tension in the chamber was thick enough to cut with a knife. Poirot let the silence stretch, watching both men carefully. Then suddenly, from the far end of the tunnel, a sound, a faint distant creak. Hastings jerked upright. "What was that?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, we are not alone." He turned toward the darkness, his mind racing. Who else knew of this passage? Who had been lurking in the shadows, listening? Shadow moved at the tunnel's edge. Poirot caught only a brief glimpse, tall, cloaked in darkness, before it vanished. Poirot's voice was urgent now. "Hastings, after them!" Hastings needed no further prompting. He took off down the tunnel at full speed, his footsteps echoing in the narrow space. Poirot turned back to Ashford and Latimer. "We will speak more of this soon, messieurs." Then, with a swift movement, he followed Hastings into the unknown. Chapter 5. Hastings ran as fast as his legs could carry him, the flickering lantern light behind him casting long, wavering shadows along the damp stone walls of the underground passage. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed ahead. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed ahead. Whoever had been eavesdropping was now trying to escape. Poirot followed close behind, his breath controlled and measured. "Hastings, do not let them out of your sight." "I'm trying, old chap, but they're damnably fast." Hastings huffed, pushing himself harder. The figure ahead turned sharply, vanishing into a side passage. Hastings lunged forward, nearly slipping on the uneven floor as he pivoted after them. The tunnel narrowed, forcing Hastings to duck slightly as he pursued the shadowy form. He could hear the sound of breathing, labored, frantic. The mysterious figure was tiring. A sudden beam of light cut across the darkness as the figure ahead burst into the open air. Hastings stumbled after them, blinking against the cool night breeze that greeted him. He had emerged at the base of the lighthouse, near the jagged cliffs overlooking the sea. Poirot arrived just moments later, adjusting his cravat as he surveyed the surroundings. The lighthouse loomed above them, its great lantern casting slow, sweeping arcs of illumination over the churning waves below. But of their quarry there was no sign. Hastings turned in a circle, scanning the rocky outcrop. Where the devil did they go? Poirot stepped carefully forward, his keen eyes studying the ground. They were here, Hastings, but observe, only one set of footprints emerges from the tunnel. Hastings frowned. That makes no sense. We were right behind them. Poirot made a thoughtful noise. And yet, my dear friend, footprints do not lie. He glanced back at the tunnel entrance. Whoever was here did not leave the way we expected. A gust of wind howled over the cliffs, sending waves crashing violently against the rocks below. The air smelled of salt and rain. Hastings shivered slightly. You don't think they... He hesitated, then lowered his voice. You don't think they threw themselves over the edge? Poirot shook his head. No. If that were the case, we would hear a splash. His gaze lifted to the lighthouse itself, its weathered stone exterior standing against the elements. No, Hastings. I suspect they went up. Hastings followed, his gaze. A metal ladder, bolted to the side of the lighthouse, led up toward the top. The rungs were slick with moisture, but faint smudges on the metal suggested recent use. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Come, mon ami, let us see who is so eager to avoid our company. With that, he reached for the ladder and began climbing. Hastings groaned. Blasted heights, he muttered, but followed nonetheless. The ascent was treacherous. The wind howled around them, rattling the ladder with each gust. Hastings kept his grip tight, avoiding looking down. Poirot, ever graceful, climbed with methodical precision. Finally, they reached the top. A small, narrow walkway encircled the great lantern. The view was dizzying, endless dark waters stretching to the horizon. Poirot stepped onto the walkway, his gaze sweeping the area. Whoever came this way cannot have vanished into thin air, Hastings. A sudden movement to the left caught Hastings's eye. There, someone's hiding behind the machinery. Poirot took a slow step forward. Step out, if you please. There is no escape. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a figure emerged from the shadows. Hastings gasped. It was Sylvia Merivale. Her usually composed demeanor was gone. Her hair was disheveled, her breathing uneven. She clutched a shawl tightly around her shoulders, her knuckles white. Poirot regarded her with mild curiosity. Mademoiselle Merivale. How very unexpected. Sylvia's chest rose and fell rapidly. You shouldn't be here. Hastings stepped forward, still catching his breath. You were in the tunnels. You were listening to us? Sylvia hesitated. Her gaze darted toward the open sea, as if calculating something. Poirot's voice was soft but firm. Mademoiselle, I must warn you. Whatever it is you are considering, I advise against it. Sylvia's grip on the shawl tightened. You don't understand. Poirot folded his arms. Then make us understand, mademoiselle. Silence stretched between them. The only sound the ceaseless crashing of the waves below. Finally, Sylvia exhaled shakily. I didn't mean to get involved. I never wanted any of this. Hastings frowned. Any of what? She turned to Poirot. You should leave, Monsieur Poirot. Go back to London. Forget this case. Poirot arched a brow. Ah, and now, you see, I am even more interested. Sylvia's expression twisted. You don't know what you're dealing with. Poirot tilted his head. Then tell me, mademoiselle. Enlighten me. She took a shaky breath. It's bigger than you think. The lighthouse. It's not just a lighthouse. Hastings exchanged a bewildered glance with Poirot. What the devil does that mean? Before she could answer, the deep toll of the lighthouse bell rang out, a warning signal for ships. But in that moment it sounded ominous, like a tolling funeral bell. Sylvia's eyes widened with alarm. "I have to go." Poirot's voice was steel. "Not yet, mademoiselle." But she was already moving. In a flash, she darted towards the ladder. Poirot lunged, catching her wrist just in time. "Mademoiselle, no rash decisions, s'il vous plaît." Sylvia struggled for a moment, then sagged in defeat. Tears glistened in her eyes. "You don't understand," she whispered. "If I tell you anything, I'll be next." Poirot's expression softened just slightly. "Who is threatening you, mademoiselle?" She hesitated, her gaze flickering toward the horizon. Then, in the faintest voice, she murmured, "The one who walks at night." A chill ran down Hastings's spine. "Who?" But before Sylvia could answer, a sudden noise erupted from below. Shouting voices, the sound of hurried footsteps on stone. Someone was coming. Poirot released her wrist. "We must move quickly. This conversation is not yet finished." Sylvia swallowed hard, then nodded. Poirot turned to Hastings. "Come, my friend. The game is truly afoot." With that, they began their descent, the secrets of the lighthouse growing darker with each passing moment. Chapter 6. The descent from the lighthouse was swift but tense. The voices below grew louder, authoritative, insistent. Hastings stole a glance at Sylvia, whose face remained pale, her breath uneven. Poirot, ever unflappable, reached the ground first, his polished shoes clicking softly against the damp stone. Emerging from the lighthouse base, they were immediately met by Inspector Graves, his coat flapping in the wind. His sharp eyes flickered between Poirot, Hastings, and Sylvia. Behind him, 2 uniformed constables stood with lanterns, their beams slicing through the misty air. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," Graves said, folding his arms. "Fancy finding you here." Poirot straightened his cuffs. "The sentiment is mutual, Inspector." Graves's gaze settled on Sylvia. "And Miss Merivale, I do believe we were meant to speak earlier. You seem rather preoccupied." Sylvia's hands trembled slightly. I was only taking a walk." Graves let out a humorless chuckle. "Up a lighthouse? At this hour?" He turned back to Poirot. "And what, may I ask, were you doing up there?" Poirot gave a polite smile. "A small investigation, mon cher Grave. The sort of thing one does when one is not limited by rigid police procedures." Graves's lips pressed into a thin line. "I should warn you, Poirot. This is a criminal investigation, not one of your parlor games." Poirot merely inclined his head. "Of course, Inspector." Graves exhaled sharply, shifting his weight. "Now, Miss Merivale," he continued, turning to her, "I believe you were about to tell me why you were really in that lighthouse." Sylvia opened her mouth, but Poirot interjected smoothly. "Inspector, surely such matters are best discussed in private." Mademoiselle Merivale is visibly shaken. Perhaps a more delicate approach would yield better results. Graves hesitated, then grunted. "Fine, but I want answers, soon." He gestured to the constables. "Take Miss Merivale back to the manor. I'll question her there." Sylvia looked at Poirot, something desperate in her eyes, but said nothing as she was escorted away. The moment she disappeared into the night, Graves turned back to Poirot. "You're hiding something." Poirot gave an exaggerated sigh. "My dear Inspector, I hide nothing. I simply uncover what others fail to see." Graves stepped closer. "Then tell me, why did she say the lighthouse isn't just a lighthouse?" Hastings started. "You heard that?" Graves tapped his ear. "Sound travels at night, Captain." He fixed Poirot with a measured stare. "So, what did she mean?" Poirot's expression remained neutral. "Ah, Inspector, but would it not be better to ask the lady herself?" Graves exhaled through his nose. "You're impossible." Poirot gave a small, knowing smile. "Merci." Back at Blackwood Manor, the tension in the drawing-room was palpable. Sylvia sat stiffly in an armchair, her hands clasped in her lap. Across from her, Sir Reginald Ashcombe paced near the fireplace, his face grim. Beside him, Clara Ashcombe, his wife, perched on the edge of a chaise lounge, her fingers tapping restlessly against her knee. Inspector Graves stood by the door, arms crossed. Poirot and Hastings took their seats nearby, observing the interplay of emotions in the room. Graves cleared his throat. "Miss Merivale, let's start again. What were you doing at the lighthouse?" Sylvia hesitated, her eyes darting toward Poirot. He gave her the smallest nod, encouraging, patient. She began, voice barely above a whisper. "I heard something in the tunnels." Sir Reginald's brow furrowed. "Tunnels?" Poirot steepled his fingers. "Oui, mon cher Ashcombe. The tunnels beneath the lighthouse. Very old, very damp, and, how shall we say, full of whispers." Sylvia swallowed hard. "I heard voices. Someone was talking about the murder." A collective hush fell over the room. Graves narrowed his eyes. "And you didn't think to come forward?" Sylvia wrung her hands. "I was afraid." Clara leaned forward, her expression stricken. "Afraid of whom?" Sylvia opened her mouth but hesitated. Poirot observed her carefully. Her gaze flickered ever so slightly towards Sir Reginald. "Ah!" Graves exhaled, shaking his head. "Miss Merivale, if you have information about Dr. Latimer's death, you need to tell us." Sylvia looked down. "I don't know anything for certain, but I heard something." Poirot's voice was gentle. "Tell us, mademoiselle." She took a deep breath. "I heard someone say it wasn't supposed to happen that way." A shiver ran down Hastings's spine. "Good Lord!" Graves leaned in. "Whose voice was it?" Sylvia shook her head. "I don't know. It was distorted, muffled by the echoes." Poirot rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "And this voice, was it alone?" Sylvia hesitated. "No, there was another voice, a woman's." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Graves straightened. "Miss Merivale, you said the lighthouse isn't just a lighthouse. What did you mean by that?" Sylvia hesitated for a long moment, then whispered, "There's something beneath it." Everyone stared. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Beneath it, you say?" She nodded. "Something hidden, something important." Graves exhaled sharply. "That's it. I'm ordering a full search of that lighthouse." Sir Reginald, who had remained quiet, suddenly stepped forward. His face was pale. "That won't be necessary." Graves turned sharply. "What do you mean?" Sir Reginald licked his lips. I I should have told you earlier.
I should have told you earlier. There are old storage chambers beneath the lighthouse. A remnant from the war. Poirot nodded. Ah, and are these chambers accessible? Reginald hesitated. They were sealed years ago. Poirot's smile was razor-sharp. And yet, Monsieur Ashcombe, you seem quite certain of this. Reginald bristled. Graves cut in. Sir Reginald, if you know something, I suggest you share it now. A tense silence followed. Then, finally, Reginald exhaled. Fine, but if you go down there, be prepared for what you might find. Poirot's expression remained unreadable. Oh, mon cher Ashcombe, that is precisely why we must go. Hastings swallowed hard. The lighthouse, the tunnels, the whispers in the dark. Whatever was hidden beneath Blackwood Manor, it was about to be uncovered. And something told him they weren't going to like what they found. Chapter 7a. Heavy silence settled over the drawing-room. The fire in the hearth crackled, but its warmth did little to thaw the tension thickening the air. Inspector Graves remained standing, his eyes locked on Sir Reginald. Poirot, ever poised, merely watched, his fingers pressed together in contemplation. Sir Reginald's face was taut with unease. Clara sat rigid, her knuckles white as she gripped the armrest of her chair. Sylvia glanced nervously between them, her breath quick and shallow. Graves broke the silence. Sir Reginald, you just said we should be prepared for what we might find beneath the lighthouse. What exactly is down there? Reginald's throat bobbed as he swallowed. He hesitated, then exhaled sharply. The tunnels are dangerous, unstable. They were closed for a reason. Poirot's voice was mild, but pointed. That is not an answer, monsieur. Reginald's jaw tightened. There's nothing down there, at least. He hesitated again, his gaze flickering toward Clara. Poirot noticed the glance. Ah! A hesitation, laced with guilt. It was Clara who spoke next, her voice quiet but firm. You should tell them, Reginald. Reginald's fingers curled into a fist. A long beat passed before he finally muttered, Fine, but not here. Graves narrowed his eyes. And why not? Because, Reginald said, standing abruptly, if we're doing this, we're doing it properly. I'll show you myself. A strange silence followed. Then Graves let out a short, clipped breath. Fine. Lead the way. Poirot stood as, well, his expression unreadable. Bon, let us go. The journey back to the lighthouse was marked by an eerie stillness. The wind had died down, and the night pressed in around them, thick with the scent of salt and damp earth. Sir Reginald led the way, a lantern swinging in his grip. Clara followed close behind, her face drawn with worry. Poirot, Hastings, and Inspector Graves walked in step, their breaths fogging in the cold. As they reached the lighthouse, its looming silhouette seemed darker than before, its beacon extinguished. The silence was deafening. Reginald stopped at the base. This way. Instead of leading them up the spiraling staircase, he turned toward a weathered iron grate, set low in the stone wall, half hidden by overgrown brambles. The grate was rusted, its hinges ancient. Reginald bent down and wrenched it open with effort. A damp, musty smell wafted out. A tunnel! Poirot's eyes gleamed in the dim light. Très intéressant. Reginald lifted the lantern higher, revealing a narrow stone passage descending into the earth. The walls were lined with crumbling bricks, moisture glistening on their surfaces. A chill curled around them, thick with age and secrets. Clara shivered. I haven't been down here in years. Graves shot her a sharp look. You've been here before, Reginald answered for her. A long time ago. He hesitated. It was during the war. This place was used to store supplies. Afterward, it was sealed. Poirot stepped closer. And yet, someone has unsealed it. Reginald hesitated again. Then, without another word, he started down the passage. The descent was slow and tense. The tunnel twisted downward, the air growing heavier with each step. Their footsteps echoed, swallowed by the suffocating dark. After several minutes, the passage widened into a chamber carved from solid rock. The lantern's glow revealed dusty crates, old barrels, and remnants of rusted equipment. Cobwebs clung to the corners, disturbed only by their arrival. And in the center of the room lay something much newer. A black leather notebook. Poirot moved first, his steps precise as he crossed the chamber and bent to retrieve the object. He turned it over, in his hands, his fingertips tracing the embossed cover. Then he flipped it open. His sharp intake of breath was almost imperceptible. Hastings, standing behind him, leaned in. "What is it?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he read silently for a few moments before closing the book with a soft snap. His gaze lifted to Reginald. "Tell me, monsieur," Poirot said smoothly, "why does this notebook contain the financial records of Dr. Latimer?" A collective hush followed. Reginald's face drained of color. Clara let out a small gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Graves stepped forward sharply. "Dr. Latimer? Are you telling me he was involved in whatever this is?" Poirot's eyes never left Reginald. "That is the question, n'est-ce pas? And I suspect the answer to why he was murdered." Reginald's breath came faster now. I don't know how that got here." Graves took the notebook from Poirot's hands and flipped through the pages. His eyes darkened. "These are bank transactions. A lot of money being moved around. Some of it withdrawn from accounts under different names." Poirot gave a small, knowing nod. "Fraud, perhaps, or something more insidious." Hastings frowned. "But why would Dr. Latimer hide this here?" Poirot's voice was quiet. Perhaps he did not. A heavy pause followed. Clara looked from the notebook to her husband, her expression stricken. "Reginald, please, tell them the truth." Reginald's throat bobbed. I don't." Then, from the tunnel behind them, a sudden noise echoed through the air, a soft scrape, a whisper of movement. They were not alone. Graves reacted first, spinning toward the sound. "Who's there?" Silence. Poirot's voice was calm but firm. "Step forward, s'il vous plaît." A beat passed. Then, out of the shadows, a figure emerged, tall, cloaked, and unmistakably familiar. Sylvia Merivale. Hastings' heart jolted. Good heavens, Sylvia! She stood rigid, her face illuminated by the flickering lantern. But her eyes were filled with something sharp, something knowing.
and in her right hand, glinting in the dim light, a small revolver. A collective breath hitched. Poirot remained utterly still. "Ah," he murmured, "so the final act begins." Chapter 8. Chilling silence filled the cavernous chamber beneath the lighthouse. The lantern's dim glow flickered against the damp walls, casting eerie shadows. Sylvia Merivale stood rigid, her face pale yet resolute. In her trembling hand, the small revolver gleamed ominously. Hastings sucked in a breath. "Sylvia, what on earth do you think you're doing?" Sylvia's grip on the weapon tightened, but her voice, when she spoke, was oddly steady. "Step away from that notebook." Inspector Graves slowly lifted his hands. His gaze remained locked on Sylvia, assessing, calculating. "Miss Merivale, put the gun down. There's no need for this." She let out a brittle laugh. "No need? You don't understand. None of you do." Her gaze flickered to the notebook in Graves' grasp. That shouldn't have been found." Poirot, ever composed, took a measured step forward. "And yet it has been, mademoiselle." His voice was soft, persuasive. "You were watching us, were you not? Following us through the tunnels." Sylvia hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. I had to. I knew you were getting too close." Reginald, still pale, turned toward her. "Sylvia, what is going on? How are you involved in this?" Sylvia's expression darkened. "You should be asking yourself that question, Sir Reginald." A thick silence followed. Poirot observed every shift in their expressions, every nuance in their reactions. Oh, a game of guilt and deception. But which was the greater truth? Graves took a cautious step forward. "Miss Merivale, listen to me." "No!" Her voice cracked. The gun wavered in her grip, her breaths ragged. "You don't get it, do you? Dr. Latimer, he wasn't innocent." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Go on." Sylvia exhaled shakily. "He was blackmailing someone. He had information, dangerous information, and he used it to line his pockets." Hastings stiffened. "Blackmail?" Sylvia gave a tight nod. "Yes, and I think you already know who he was blackmailing." Her gaze slid toward Reginald. Reginald's mouth parted slightly, but no words came. Clara clutched his sleeve. "Reginald, tell me it isn't true." His jaw clenched. "It's not that simple." Poirot lifted a single finger. "Ah, but nothing ever is, mon ami." He turned back to Sylvia. "Tell me, mademoiselle, did you kill Dr. Latimer?" Sylvia's eyes widened. "What? You were involved, that much is clear. But did you pull the trigger?" Her lips trembled. Then, with a slow shake of her head, she whispered, "No." Poirot studied her carefully. "And yet you are here, in the tunnels, with a gun." Sylvia swallowed hard. "Because I know who did." A slow hush fell over the chamber. The waves outside crashed against the cliffs, their distant roar the only sound. Graves took a firm step closer. "Then tell us." Sylvia's fingers flexed around the revolver. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she said, "It was him." She turned and pointed the gun directly at Sir Reginald Whitmore. A collective gasp rang through the chamber. Clara stumbled back, eyes wide in horror. "No, no, that can't be true." Reginald's face remained stone-like. his body tense. But Poirot saw the smallest flicker in his expression. A hesitation, a calculation. Poirot let out a small sigh. Alas, I feared it might be so. Hastings was aghast. Poirot, you believe her? Poirot pressed his fingertips together. It is not a matter of belief, Monsieur Hastings. It is a matter of logic. Consider the facts. Dr. Latimer was blackmailing someone. That someone had a great deal to lose should his secrets come to light. And when Latimer threatened to expose him, the doctor met his unfortunate demise. Graves folded his arms, and the only person with the means, the motive, and the access to these tunnels is Sir Reginald. All eyes fell upon the baronet. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Then, without warning, he lunged towards Sylvia. A sharp cry rang out. The gun fired, a deafening explosion in the confined space. The bullet struck the stone wall, sending shards of rock flying. In the confusion, Sylvia stumbled, and Reginald seized her wrist, twisting the gun from her grasp. Graves reacted in an instant, tackling Reginald to the ground. The lantern tumbled, its flame casting wild shadows across the chamber walls. Shh! Rushed forward to help, while Clara let out a horrified sob. Reginald struggled, but Graves pinned him down, wrenching his arms behind his back. That's enough, Whitmore. It's over. Breathless, Poirot stepped forward and retrieved the fallen revolver. He turned to Sylvia, who was clutching her wrist, eyes glassy with shock. Poirot's voice was gentle. "Are you hurt, mademoiselle?" Sylvia exhaled shakily, shaking her head. "No, just shaken." Clara, tears streaming down her face, whispered, "Reginald, why?" For the first time, Reginald Whitmore did not have an answer. That struggle ceased. His shoulders slumped, and the weight of his actions settled upon him like an anchor. Poirot studied him with something almost akin to pity. Then he turned to Graves. "Inspector, I believe the case is now quite clear." Graves huffed, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "You can say that again." Poirot smoothed his coat, glancing toward Hastings. "And thus, mon ami, the affair at the lighthouse nears its inevitable conclusion." Hastings exhaled. "Good Lord, Poirot, you never cease to amaze me." Poirot's moustache twitched ever so slightly. "It is merely a matter of the little grey cells, Hastings." With Reginald detained and the truth finally laid bare, the group slowly began their ascent out of the tunnels. But Poirot could not shake the sensation that there was still one last detail left unresolved. One final truth waiting to surface. And he intended to uncover it. Chapter 9. The wind howled as they emerged from the underground tunnels, stepping into the ghostly glow of the lighthouse. The night was thick with mist, curling around them like the lingering whispers of the past. The waves crashed violently against the jagged cliffs below, as if nature itself had been stirred by the night's revelations. Inspector Graves kept a firm grip on Sir Reginald Whitmore's arm, his face set in grim determination. The once respected baronet had not spoken a word since his capture. His silence to Poirot spoke volumes. Sylvia Merivale sat on a wooden bench near the lighthouse door, her hands trembling in the lantern's dim glow. Clara Whitmore, her face streaked with tears, stood apart from the group, gazing at her husband. No, the man she thought she had married, with a mixture of horror and disbelief. Hastings exhaled, rubbing his temple. "Well, Poirot, I must say, I thought we had it all figured out, but you still look like a man with an unanswered question." Poirot, standing perfectly still, tilted his head slightly. "Ah, mon cher Hastings, you know me well. Something does not sit right." Graves huffed. "What are you talking about? Poirot, we have a confession of sorts. We have a motive. Dr. Latimer was blackmailing Sir Reginald. Latimer ends up dead, and Reginald, when confronted, lashes out in a desperate attempt to silence Miss Merivale. Seems straightforward enough to me." Poirot's gaze flickered toward Reginald. The baronet met his stare with tired, hollow eyes. There was something in his expression, something Poirot had seen before in guilty men who had accepted their fate. And yet, Poirot took a measured step forward. "Tell me, Sir Reginald, why did you not deny it?" A sharp silence fell over the group. Clara gasped softly. Graves frowned. Hastings stiffened. Reginald lifted his head slightly, the corner of his mouth twitching into something that resembled a bitter smirk. Would it have made a difference? Poirot's sharp eyes glittered. "Ah, that is the question, is it not?" Sylvia's breath hitched. "What are you saying, Poirot?" Poirot pressed his fingertips together. "I am saying, mademoiselle, that there is a crucial difference between not denying and confessing." Graves muttered under his breath. "Good Lord!" Poirot continued, stepping closer to Reginald. "Monsieur, I ask you once, did you kill Dr. Latimer?" Reginald's lips parted. For the first time his mask slipped. Doubt flickered in his eyes, and then he closed his mouth. Poirot caught his breath. There it was. Hastings blinked. "Wait, he's hesitating." Poirot's voice was a whisper now. "Oui, mon ami, because there is something still unsaid." Clara clutched her shawl tighter, her voice unsteady. "Reginald, for heaven's sake, if you didn't do it, tell us now." Reginald inhaled deeply, his jaw working as if struggling against invisible chains. The wind howled around them, then, softly, so softly Poirot almost missed it. Reginald whispered, "It wasn't me." A collective gasp rose from the group. Graves cursed under his breath. Sylvia's eyes widened in shock. Poirot straightened, his mind racing. "Then why, mon ami, did you allow us to believe it was?" Reginald let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Because I thought I knew who did." His gaze flickered toward Clara. Every eye turned to Lady Whitmore. Her breath hitched. "No, no, Reginald, how could you think that?" Reginald's voice was hoarse. "You were the last one with him." Poirot's sharp mind clicked into place. The missing piece, the hidden truth. "Ah," Poirot breathed. "It is as I suspected." Hastings, still catching up, threw his hands in the air. "Poirot, for goodness sake, who killed Dr. Latimer?" Poirot turned, looking at them all. His voice, though calm, carried a weight that made the night itself feel heavier. "The real murderer is still among us." A stunned silence followed. Graves cursed again. "What?" Sylvia stepped back. Then who?" Poirot lifted a single finger. "It is time to finish this game, mes amis. Let us gather inside. I shall now reveal everything." The lighthouse door creaked open as they stepped inside. The storm raged beyond the glass panes, but within these
walls, the true storm had yet to break. Poirot adjusted his cuffs, straightened his tie, and took his place at the center of the room. It was time for the final gathering, time to expose the real murderer. Chapter 10. The interior of the lighthouse was dimly lit by flickering lanterns. The storm outside continued its relentless assault, rain lashing against the windows as the sea roared below. Inside, however, the true tempest was about to begin. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small figure commanding the space with quiet authority. Around him, the suspects sat in tense silence. Sir Reginald Whitmore, Lady Clara Whitmore, Sylvia Merivale, and Inspector Graves. Hastings, standing to the side, watched them all with wary eyes. He had seen this moment before. Poirot's grand reveal, the moment when the pieces fell into place, and the truth, long hidden, was finally exposed. Poirot cleared his throat, his voice as smooth and deliberate as ever. Mes amis, we have reached the end of our little mystery. Now, the truth must come to light. Sylvia swallowed. You said the real murderer is still among us. If it's not Sir Reginald, then who? Poirot smiled slightly. Ah, mademoiselle, that is the very question I am here to answer. He turned his sharp gaze to Sir Reginald. You allowed us to believe you were guilty, because you thought your wife, Lady Clara, had committed the crime. You saw her near Latimer's room that night. You knew she had something to hide. Clara gasped. Reginald, you thought I... Reginald looked away, his shame evident. I didn't know what to believe. I thought I was protecting you. Poirot nodded. A noble gesture, but one based on false assumptions. He turned to Clara. Madame, you were not the killer. But you did see something, did you not? Clara hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yes. That night, I saw someone leave Dr. Latimer's room, but I was afraid to say anything. Graves leaned forward. And who was it? Clara turned, her eyes locking onto Sylvia Merivale. A collective hush fell over the room. Sylvia's face drained of colour. That's ridiculous. I never. Poirot raised a hand. Mademoiselle, I suggest you do not waste your breath on denial. You see, the truth has been evident for some time. You were the last person to see Dr. Latimer alive. The good doctor had uncovered something about you, had he not? Sylvia's hands trembled. This is madness. Poirot's voice hardened. No, mademoiselle, this is justice. He stepped forward. Shall I tell everyone what truly happened? No one spoke. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Poirot continued. Dr. Latimer had discovered that you were not truly Sylvia Merivale. Gasps erupted around the room. Poirot nodded. The real Sylvia Merivale died years ago in an accident, but you took her identity. Perhaps it was to escape a troubled past, or to claim an inheritance not meant for you. Dr. Latimer, being the perceptive man that he was, uncovered this truth, and so he confronted you. Sylvia was shaking now, her eyes darting towards the door. Poirot blocked her path. You killed him, mademoiselle. In a moment of panic, you struck him, perhaps with the very paperweight on his desk. You thought You could make it look like an accident, but you were careless. You left the door unlocked. Hastings exhaled sharply. Good Lord. Poirot continued. Lady Clara saw you leaving the room that night. Sir Reginald, in turn, suspected his wife. But the truth was far more sinister. Sylvia's face contorted with rage. You can't prove anything. Poirot smiled. Ah, but I can. You see, I checked Dr. Latimer's notes. He had written one final sentence before he died, just a single word. He turned to Inspector Graves. Do you have the notebook? Graves, grim-faced, pulled out the small leather-bound book. He opened to the last page and turned it toward the group. One word was scrawled in the doctor's handwriting, faint but unmistakable. Sylvia. A terrible silence followed. Poirot tilted his head. You see, mademoiselle, even in death he named his killer. Sylvia let out a ragged breath, her entire body trembling. And then she ran. With a cry, she bolted for the door, but Graves was faster. He seized her by the arm, yanking her back. Oh, no, you don't. She struggled, but it was useless. The fight had drained out of her. Poirot shook his head sadly. You would have been caught sooner or later, mademoiselle. A lie, no matter how carefully constructed, always unravels in the end. Graves forced Sylvia into a chair, his voice grim. You're under arrest. For a moment, no one spoke. The wind howled outside, as if mourning the tragic end of the affair. Sir Reginald slumped in his seat, his face pale. So, it wasn't Clara. He turned to his wife, regret in his eyes. I'm so sorry. Clara's expression softened, but she said nothing. Hastings shook his head in disbelief. You know, Poirot, you never fail to astound me. Poirot smiled, adjusting his cuffs. Ah, mon ami, it is not I who astounds, but the truth itself. One only needs to look at it correctly. Graves sighed. Well, that's one for the books. Another case closed. Poirot nodded. Indeed. And with that, I believe our business here is concluded. He turned toward the door, straightening his coat. Come, Hastings. I believe I have had quite enough of lighthouses for one evening. Hastings chuckled. Agreed. With a final glance at the stormy sea, Hercule Poirot stepped into the night, his little grey cell satisfied, another mystery solved. End of story.